Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Catherine Macy, and I am the project director for the ONEAL Project. And if you're not here today to learn about expanding your collection horizons with negotiation skill development, you're in the wrong place. I do have a QR code. It just leads to my institutional repository with the presentation in it, as well as the handout. Those things are also in your Whova app. So I've made multiple places available so that you can get access to it. Before we get started, what I want to first do is remind us of all the code of conduct, as well as the best practices that we are going to try to practice as we go through this presentation. I want to try to make this interactive. I could easily talk about this stuff for an hour. I know we cannot. So my goal today is to introduce the curriculum, talk about some hot topics, or at least introduce where you can get some resources for it, as well as maybe perhaps in addition to Q&A, we can ask each other what we're doing and what our challenges are. So I want to start with a poll question. If you have your Whova app handy, I would love for you to answer this question really quick. Negotiations tends to create a lot of complex feelings. And really, I'm just curious. I know you're doing, unlike most of us, we learn to negotiate on the job. I was really fortunate in the fact that this is my second career. I used to work as an analyst and prepare and execute negotiations before I went into working in libraries and becoming a librarian. And I was just kind of floored by the fact that it's basically a footnote in library school. And we learn it on the job, and we're trying to figure out as library workers how to do this thing where culturally, a lot of us don't expect to go into librarianship to have to negotiate. That's not what we're thinking about at all. However, we need to do that. And the thing about negotiations is it's really about improving your ability to communicate. It's about having conversations. And the better both library workers and vendors are around understanding the skills and strategies around negotiations, the better and more effective our conversations can be. So I just want to see what people have to say about how they feel about negotiations. So I'm going to pull up this Whova. Yes. It would be underneath if you go underneath the session itself, it will show under in that as a poll in the session. So if I drag this over, we see lots of it. I will just kind of read because it's hard to see. We see everything from anxious and angry to positive to unprepared, feeling like it's a weakness, nervous. Some people love it. Some people love and hate it. This is all really natural, mostly because a lot of us feel uncomfortable asking for what we need and what our libraries need because we are conditioned to be people pleasers. And I would even say, I know I have vendors in this room as well. You guys feel equally as anxious because you don't know how the conversation's going to go. And you may or may not, depending on the size of the publisher, have had formalized training on this. We basically, over the last year, have been developing this for library workers. However, it is open for anybody to use. All right. So, planning and executing negotiations is really similar to chess. It's about knowing the moves, the counter moves, trying to understand what people may do. David Oliver in How to Negotiate Effectively states, negotiation is in some ways like chess. You are prepared to sacrifice particular pieces in the interest of winning the game. In chess, you know the pieces, but you can't see into the other person's mind. In negotiation, you don't necessarily know the pieces. You have to discover and develop your own pieces and find ways to uncover your counterparts. So you're going to see this chess theme throughout this because I just feel like it is the best analogy for what we're trying to do. The ONEAL Project happens to be an IMLS funded project. We are finishing up really the first grant for that right now, and it stands for Open Negotiation Education for Academic Libraries. Now, yes, we focused on academic libraries. However, I will say if you work at another type of library, we have lessons that are widely applicable, and I'll point those out. Now, we did focus very primarily on library workers with this. And one question we received at another conference is like, what about vendors? And we very much are conscious of that as well. And we see incorporating vendor perspectives much more, especially as we continue on other phases of the projects and developing other tools. No matter what, though, I think this benefits the entire community because it's going to teach skills and give people a foundation so we can all communicate better, so we can have better conversations and create sustainable relationships in the long run. So we strongly believe nothing for the community without the community. And in creating the curriculum we've created thus far, and we're still developing, we have involved so many people, from 93 attendees who came on average to 3 different community forums in fall 2022. 20 library workers participated in a curriculum planning workshop in November 2022. We have 35 interviewees that participate in qualitative research. I actually spot a few in the crowd right now, and we're very grateful, who helped give us perspectives so that when we're developing curriculum, we can do it centered around real library experiences. And we had 26 pilot testers who completed the Foundations curriculum in fall 2023. So last spring, we launched the Foundations module, and I would say that no matter what type of library, there are certain concepts, particularly in the Introduction to Negotiations and the Negotiation Planning Part 1 strategy, that are widely applicable to everybody. This is about best practice around negotiations, and what the research says are top tactics, and really, in my opinion, the big thing around negotiations to be successful, it's about planning and making the time to do that. Contracts and licensing is right now very focused on academic libraries in the United States. We would like to further flesh this out for other geographic regions, as well as and considering other types of libraries down the line, and we're hoping that we can eventually find community volunteers that can be expert content creators that can help us do this. The internal review lesson is very focused on how do you use internal library data to prepare for a negotiation. The vendor research lesson is centered on trying to understand the other point of view, the other side, finding industry research, pricing trends, company research, and being able to understand that so that you can try to guess what they might want and what their motivations are so that you can find a more sustainable agreement quicker. The accessibility lesson is actually a lesson in our issues module. And we really think this is increasingly important considering what we all know is coming down the pipe in the next 2 years, which is anything that we provide access to through our websites, especially if we're a public institution, must be accessible. And so we really wanted to push that particular issues lesson out right away. Every single lesson basically within the curriculum includes lesson plans, recorded lectures that are made to be either you could watch them and listen, you can read the PowerPoint presentations. It was really important for us to consider accessibility and provide multiple modes of learning through creating this open educational resource. There are hands-on exercises using best pedagogical practice so that you can put the key learnings into place. And we have a few case studies that you can use to help starting to practice around negotiations. We've put all these exercises together in a workbook that you can use and organize your activities and save it, so that way as you work on negotiations in the future, you can participate in it. And then lastly, we also, knowing that some people are going to learn on their own and others might be working with group, we've developed a group activity guide. We've also made this so it's easily integrated and into various LIS or MLS courses. So if they want to take a section or a chunk of this and include it into a library science class, that is possible. So we partnered with Spark. They're hosting the curriculum for us, and I just want to give us just show you the website really quick. We're very grateful that they're willing to give this interface, because while it's an OER, it's stuck in a bunch of institutional repositories, and that is not an easy thing for people to access. So we basically worked with them so that way we could build out a website for it. On this website, what you're going to find is information about the curriculum itself. You will also find that we have right now a library worker-centered Discord where you can join it if you're a library worker in a library to be able to get help while completing the curriculum, as well as to get support and ideas while negotiating. Right now, it's limited to library workers. We have been in discussions or looking at perhaps creating more of a joint portal where library workers and vendors could also chat, or down the lines in the next phases of the project. But if you go into the curriculum, you'll see that it is organized so that you can get access to every single lesson, from the introduction to ONEAL, to contracts and licensing. You can also get access to our workbook. So the workbook itself is basically organized around each lesson. Come on. And it gives you back, we try to design each lesson considering the TILT framework. So translating, I now can't remember what TILT stands for, but it basically means transparency in learning and teaching. So that you understand what the learning objectives are, the various lessons, what you're trying to get at it, what success looks like within the workbook itself. And it's very handy. It looks very long with 84 pages, but there's lots of white space in it. We give it to you guys both in PDF as well as Word. So if you wanted to do a PDF, you can. You can also download the Word, which make a Word version, which is really easy to be able to add and edit. Now, one activity that we talk about in this workbook that we have gotten so much feedback as being helpful and useful when it comes to learning how to negotiate and getting better at negotiations is an activity centered around starting a negotiation journal where you reflect on your negotiations. You reflect on your planning, you reflect on the outcomes, what went well, what did not. And the big thing that people have to say is it's weirdly soul-searching, but they find that by using a journal and taking that reflective practice, they continue to improve and do better. We have had from people who participated in the pilot, who've completed the curriculum and have anecdotally, they have found that their bosses have said they've watched a marked improvement in how they negotiate. So just try not to make people seasick. But we basically structure it and try to explain everything each step along the way. All right. I'm looking for my mouse. All right. Coming in November, we are actually going to have, we were trying to get it done by this conference. We're in the middle of it. My guess it's going to be December when we will actually publish it. We're going to have a new strategies module. This new strategies module is currently under development, and it's going to include developing values-driven negotiations. It's going to introduce concepts such as power mapping and applications. There's going to be an even deeper dive into contracts and licensing terms than what was in the foundations. Basically, you got that foundational knowledge on how to start reading contracts, and now we're going to talk about some of the more complicated terms you might encounter. Starting to talk about AI. I actually see us eventually having a full module on AI. AI is kind of a wild west right now, and we're all trying to figure it out. I know I'm actually going to several different presentations while at this conference trying to wrangle it and understand it. There will also be strategies for engagement with students, faculty, library workers, and administrators. And that's coming in November. We are also working with a team of expert collaborators that are creating a privacy and surveillance module that our goal is to publish that in probably early spring 2025. We're going to finish drafting it by December, and then we're going to be editing it and getting it all ready to go for you guys so that we use the principles around making sure everything's accessible, making sure everything's captured correctly, multiple formats, and that just takes a bit of time, but that is coming very soon. So I have another poll question for you all. There are a lot of hot topics happening right now, and if you can take a moment to answer what hot topic you are particularly interested in learning about, we'd appreciate it. I'm going to both use that to help me as I am trying to create new content or find people, but I also am just curious is what are those burning questions? Is it things like AI? Is it privacy and surveillance? And I'm just really curiously as to what are the things that people are most challenged with. What this really tells me is we're all dealing with a lot of different issues and trying to figure out what to do. And I think it really boils down to that intersection of where technology is with licensing and the fact that our licensing is not keeping up with all the changes in technology. AI is a big one, privacy and surveillance, accessibility. I'm trying to figure out how we're going to manage the whole accessibility question right now because sometimes I'm looking at VPATs and they say that they hit the standard, and you look at the resource and you're like, no, they do not hit the standard. Like there's things that are really obviously wrong. And then what is our mechanisms to work with our vendor partners in order to get those issues resolved, especially is there language in our contracts so that we can get the issues resolved. All of these I think are important for us to do. And right now we're currently have one active module around this, which is accessibility, and we will have privacy and surveillance soon. One thing that I promised to do with this presentation, because I know it's so new, is I wanted to create a resource handout for all of you. The fact is, as I mentioned, we're dealing with a wild west in regards to topics like artificial intelligence. To help everyone here get better versed on these topics as we try to figure it out, the project team consolidated a list of resources to help further understand several topics, including AI, privacy and surveillance, negotiating text and data mining. We're actively working to incorporate these topics within the curriculum. And before I ask my last poll question, I do want to say thanks. And if you want to learn more information about the project, this is our project website. We keep it up to date with news around the project itself. You can get access to the curriculum through the project website. You can join the Discord. You can figure out how to contact us. And we really are looking for more people to collaborate with. If you happen to work for a library outside the U.S. and you want to work with us for developing learning modules around your contracts and licensing, we welcome that expertise. If you think you have specific knowledge around some of the hot topic issues, we really would like your help in developing resources. We are not into reinventing the wheel. We are looking to take existing work that is out there and reorganize it in such a way that it can be incorporated into curriculum and basically consolidating all the existing resources together. Many of our expert collaborators so far happen to have specialized knowledge and have already developed resources, and it's just a matter of how do we reorganize it so that everyone can use it, and of course, then again, we all benefit. If you are a vendor who's interested in lending perspectives, we also welcome you reaching out to us as we think about how we're going to incorporate more of that voice as we do work on this project. And really, my goal was to talk for about 20 minutes. I'm getting close. I'm just a little over that because I really want to hopefully answer any questions you have around the project itself, as well as maybe have a little bit of conversation around the room as to what challenges you're facing and if anybody has any ideas on how to tackle them when it comes to negotiations. And so here's our last poll question. What is your biggest challenge with negotiations right now? I'm seeing right here that it is really about how fast technology is changing and the fact that the licensing always seems to be well behind. And I think that's an issue that happens to affect both library workers and vendors. Because I'm sure for the vendors in the room, your product development teams develop these products, maybe products around AI, and they give it to you to sell. And you're talking to librarians, and we have some concerns. You know, one of the reasons we want to put this list of resources together is not just so that library workers are aware of the issue, but so vendors can go, oh, this is why my librarians, my library staff are all trying to talk to me about this, and they're worried about it. And I really, again, it's one of those things where I think if we all kind of understand where all the concerns are coming from, we can have better conversations and we can go back to product teams. And I say that as somebody who, in a past life, I have worked on sales. I have been on the sales side of things, and I have negotiated things and gone and understood that, oh, my customer is really concerned about this thing, and I need to go talk to my technical people so I understand it better so I can address those needs. So I really hope that if we can all talk about this a little bit more and understand what those key issues are, we can facilitate better conversations as well as making sure we address those concerns in product development. Another big issue is a lot of people learned on the job. I'm just curious, raise your hand, who here learned negotiations in library school? No. Who here learned because their work sent them to a very specific, like, negotiating training class? One person, two people. Who here learned it because they learned it on the job? Yep. Again, I'm like, I want to change, it's great that we're learning on the job, but I really do strongly believe that there are best practices that, and I'm sure that's learn on the job is both an issue for both library workers and vendors, depending on the size of the vendor. Some, we all can be better at this. There are best practices. It's really about teaching tools for communication so we can ask for what we need and clearly communicate what we can and cannot do. And also make peace with it, because sometimes no is the answer. And I've had so many conversations with vendors where, like, I'd rather you just say no or say not this year, talk to me in 2 years, check in with me, rather than just dodging the issue. Because I know for a fact that I have a resource that I've been looking at getting, and I said, I can't do it yet. Talk to me in 2 years. I'm working on it. And they appreciate that. They're like, okay, I'm just going to make sure I loop you in. I'm not going to worry that you're just not responding to my email anymore. I think those are all things that can help us foster better relationships. And there are relationship issues that people are dealing with between the library and the vendor. And I think really it all boils down to communication. And I know when we did the qualitative survey and coded it, one of the big issues was turnover and lack of context of understanding libraries. And that can be particularly the case when you're dealing with smaller vendors whose primary customer is not necessarily libraries. How do we rapidly increase that education so that people understand the point of view that we happen to have and the resources and how we're trying to provide access and how we authenticate, because it can be quite different than working with companies if that's your primary customer. By the way, I'm used to be a business librarian, so I'm so used to that. And shout out to all my business librarian peeps I see out in the crowd. So that is a big thing. And I think really, and then we also are dealing, of course, with internal stakeholder issues that we're starting to address that in the strategies module that is to come. And really what we want to do is give you the steps needed so you can start preparing for your negotiations and know how to start doing that. So I'm just curious. I'm going to open it up for anybody who has questions or comments, or if they want to share their challenges. If somebody answered other and they want to speak up as to what their biggest issue is, I welcome it at this time. So thank you very much.
Texas has some very strict state laws about language that has to be in contracts. And I have surprisingly found some vendors be very reticent to agree to this, even though it's state law. And they're like, well, X university in Texas didn't make us do this. And I'm trying to make them understand that just because somebody else either didn't catch it or didn't know or wasn't doing their job properly or whatever it may be doesn't mean that I can let it go. Mm-hmm. And so I'm wondering how you negotiate with these vendors and try and make them understand, like, you're not just going to be losing our business. It's every public institution in the entire state.
I think in that case, like you have state law. Somebody ignored it or forgot or it went through, and you have to go, sorry, I am obligated by this. My general counsel will not let me sign this agreement without meeting state law. And that's what you can say. And it may be a little bit pushing back. You may need to escalate it up to the next person in the chain. I don't know if my co-PI is in here. One of my co-PIs is also visiting at this conference. And she is many times, like, she's had vendors who know her name. And they're like, oh, this person's on because she's pushing back on again. You just have to be solid and go, we cannot sign it. And our general counsel will not do that. And I know that's harder than said than done, because it's like you have to keep. Just know that's I think part of negotiation planning is outlining what you can and cannot do and what those hard lines are so that you can effectively communicate them. And then in the end of the day, if you cannot come to an agreement or cannot sign the agreement, you know you did what you could, and it's not a personal thing on you. It's just you guys couldn't come to an agreement, and you can leave it. And that's what I think is most beneficial about negotiation planning, is knowing that at the end of the day, if you don't come to an agreement, it was still a good day. It just, you stood by your boundaries.
Let's say a well-known vendor, it's the second time we've had this issue, that's using delay as a tactic. Delay as in more than a year. So the rep, it's not which is the person has turned over 3 or 4 times in the interim. It's not their fault. They're like, I have to ask legal. And a month will go by and you'll say, what's going on? And like, oh, let me check with legal. and then another month goes by, and it's for things that are like, I cannot agree to sign a license that says I'm going to be responsible for my user's behavior. I can't. I cannot guarantee that no user will do something they're not supposed to do. I can take reasonable precautions. I can make the terms available for them to see. I can report it if I know it happens, and I can work with the vendor to remediate the problem when it happens. But I cannot promise that no student at Ithaca College or anywhere else will ever like try to hack their system or whatever. So that's one where I draw a line, and I cannot get anywhere with this vendor because they just keep putting us off. And like we're sort of like, they're still giving us the product and we haven't paid for it yet. But what do you do with the vendor who uses delay as a tactic in hopes that you'll give up and just agree?
I'm of the opinion that when it comes to delaying tactics, one of the things I try to be very clear with the vendors I'm negotiating with, what is my expectations. And I also, I try to, and explain that, delaying tactics will not force our decision. And I said, I expect that, like, here's our expectation of response over time, and trying to be very clear about that, saying it as nicely as possible, of course, because we're librarians. But we won't make a decision just because we're up against a deadline. And I think I've found in my experience, like you have, they haven't cut it off because we're still negotiating. I think the other key piece is documenting and keeping track. And that's where, like, either journaling or some other thing, so that you can say, I've contacted you on this date and this date and this date. And I think you have to not be afraid of bringing it up to the next level and go, I need to talk to your regional manager. If it's not moving, because I've had a couple of vendors where we've had one billing issue after another, and mistakes and everything else, and it took us escalating it to the next level to get it resolved, because it was putting the whole relationship at risk, and they made databases for several different disciplines. But I think it's really, it's that document and not being afraid to escalate it up, but don't let it, like, stand true. Do not let it force your hand.
So I was going to respond back as an event vendor to the UT Arlington and Ithaca. So for Texas, so I've worked with the different Texas systems, and sometimes we'll get a contract through with another Texas school, and then we'll just keep that contract on file and not change anything. So when a new Texas school wants to sign something, it's completely different. So I would absolutely push back and just say, hey, that may be old or last year or 2 years ago, and just push back and say, hey, this is new. And the vendor should respect that and just, look, there's nothing we can do. This is Texas state law. So I would absolutely push back on it. And then for Ithaca, for the delay tactic, I would actually schedule a group webinar with everybody involved and say, look, let's get who needs to talk to and who needs to talk to, and get a call scheduled, Teams meeting, and get them all together in the same room. Yeah, I know you try. I know you try, but yeah, absolutely. I would push back and say, hey, because I've run in that situation with a school. I'm talking to a school, and it was an accessibility issue, and I said, okay, get me into the room with the accessibility so I could answer the questions. And as soon as I got into they're like, oh yeah, it's this and this. I'm like, oh, perfect. So I would push back and just get them on a Teams call. So
I would say that is actually great advice, because I've heard both librarians and now a vendor say, like, just schedule a meeting with everybody. And if they get the right people in a room and get it scheduled and on the books, as a way to try to get the conversation moving. I've actually heard several people who have used that successfully. Yeah.
Hey, how's it going? My name's Ruben Adorno. I'm with Bloomberg, also a vendor. And I'm sorry if I missed this in the beginning just because I was a little tardy, but I'm curious if the ONEAL Project has any modules that we can share with our personal legal teams, because at Bloomberg, they're very focused, as you were saying earlier, on the corporate side of business. That's 90% of the income. And sometimes our lawyers don't understand the redlining process that comes in the academic space. So I'm wondering if you guys do any sort of modules like that can help support them and just kind of open their minds to why it's necessary.
That is actually, it's funny. I hadn't even thought about that. And as someone who is a former business librarian, knows Bloomberg very, very well. That's actually for us to be able to produce something that explains academic libraries and the context in our authenticate. That is actually really an awesome idea. And I just hadn't, thank you. And I would say all this curriculum, it's openly available. Anybody, like library workers, vendors, if you want to see what we talk about, our big thing is just how do you help people really understand all the basics, and what is the best practices, like ideas like needing to. I know we all have the natural inclination to want to negotiate one issue at a time. But truly the best, most creative deals are when both sides are negotiating all the issues at the same time. And really thinking about what happens to be the interests on both sides, so that way you can try to do that so we can have long-term sustainable relationships.